Welcome to the EthnoMed podcast, a community voice in the clinic. My name is Dr. Duncan Reed, a physician in the International Medicine Clinic at Harborview Medical Center and medical director of EthnoMed, a web resource for providers and patients with information for cross-cultural care. Today, we are continuing our interview series called Provider Pulse, where we elevate diverse voices from across healthcare fields to learn the paths people took to their current roles in healthcare, and how their cross-cultural experiences have helped them provide more informed care to a diverse patient population. Whether you are an undergraduate student considering a career in healthcare, a practicing health professional, or a member of the community, these conversations are for you.
The kind of expectation then was that you study psychology and then you go on to do your doctorate, become a psychologist, etc. But I knew that for me that didn't necessarily feel right. I knew that there was more. I was passionate about psychology and about mental health, but I knew that there was a different path that I felt like I had to take, but I didn't know what. It's not going to come to you easy. Like whatever you're passionate about, whatever you want to do in the world, everything takes so much challenge and so many obstacles to overcome. And a part of it is a test for you to be sure that this is what you're really passionate about.
In today's episode, we speak with JJ Bola, writer, poet, mental health social worker, and UNHCR Ambassador. Born in the Democratic Republic of Congo and raised in London, from early dreams of basketball to finding his voice in literature and advocacy, JJ Bola offers an honest look at navigating family expectations, balancing creativity with a career in mental health, and the power of representation for refugee and immigrant communities. This conversation will inspire you to see your own path as a work in progress.
So my name's JJ Bola. I'm a writer, poet, a mental health social worker, and UNHCR Ambassador. My family were refugees from Congo, DRC, to London, UK, where I grew up. I guess my journey has been quite varied in both experiences, challenges, both within education and outside of it as well. So I grew up in London, went to secondary school in London, also university, and I studied psychology in university. And I think that was partially because there was a lot of expectation to pursue further education, but I was also really passionate about mental health, although I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in terms of mental health. The kind of expectation then was that you study psychology and then you go on to do your doctorate, become a psychologist, etc. But I knew that for me that didn't necessarily feel right. I knew that there was more. I was passionate about psychology and about mental health, but I knew that there was a different path that I felt like I had to take, but I didn't know what. So in terms of my family, we left Congo in 1992. Congo in 1992 was under the dictatorship of President Mobutu. And through that period, particularly throughout the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of civil uprisings that would eventually lead to the first Congo War in 1996. And so for us, particularly as my family had involvement in politics, it was becoming increasingly unsafe. And so my parents were forced to make the decision of fleeing. And for me, I think I was about 6 years old at the time, arriving in the UK. Had no idea what was going on, as you can imagine. There wasn't really a conversation, and not until kind of perhaps many years later as well. So we just came to a new place. We went to school, told that our education is important and that we're different. That was the one thing that I think my parents did emphasize, was that we're different. Our experience is different, So we didn't know what that difference was necessarily, but we knew that there was an experience that we'd had that not many other people had. And as we kind of moved through to our teenage years, then that's when we began to learn more about our refugee status, about our history in terms of Congo and Congolese politics, but also what's possible in the future. And I think for me, when I was passionate about studying psychology, I think a part of it was also wanting to understand myself better, understand the people around me, the experiences they were having as well. And that's where I started to learn about trauma, particularly, back then there wasn't a conversation or narrative that was common. Not a lot of people spoke about it, but that did help me to understand my experiences more. And when it came to graduating university, I knew that it was around that time that I was also developing my passion for writing and for reading and for books generally. I mean, I'd always been passionate about reading, but specifically writing, and I started off writing poetry. I knew that there was something more that I wanted to do beyond the conventional career route. So I did lots of jobs. Jobs that I would say like maybe a graduate probably wouldn't be doing typically. But I think my first job out of university was research. I remember working for part of a research department in another university. And honestly, I just found that so boring. Like, I personally just found that boring. Like, I was like, I can't believe I've studied 3 years and then this is the culmination of my studies. And all I'm doing is basically just quantifying data, and it was interesting enough that you got paid, but I was just like, surely this can't be it, I didn't feel like I was making an impact. I didn't feel like I was learning or contributing. So I was driven to find out more. And at that time, I guess when you're 21, 22, you can be a bit more impulsive because you don't have as much responsibilities and so forth. So I did quit that job after about 6 months. And my parents were like, what are you doing? You've got a good job. And I was like, trust me, I'll figure it out. I'm very glad that things worked out afterwards. But and I did lots of many other jobs from I think after that job I went straight into working in a warehouse, and I met some really interesting people there, and I volunteered with different organizations, with the European Council. I did some projects back then called, if I can remember correctly, called the Living Library with the European Youth Council in Strasbourg. And it was essentially where a lot of the politicians and the workers there would speak to you, and you would be kind of like a living book, and they would speak to you about your experiences as a refugee. And so it was like one-to-one engagement and stuff. And that was really interesting. And after doing that, I was like, wow, it's really important. That's why I started to discover more about kind of the importance of telling my story or my family story or like a refugee community story. And then from then on, I started writing poetry. I put it on the blog and just started sharing more and more and more. And it just unraveled.
And when did your writing start? When did you start really writing?
I feel like I would say writing professionally. So I did an MA in creative writing in 2016. I think that really took it to another level where I really learned the craft and the professionalism of writing. Prior to that, I was always writing, but it was very much the kind of writing that was fleeting. I'm an artist, I write when I feel like it, versus you have a deadline, like get to work type of thing, and show up at your desk every day. And so I think around that period was when I had to shift from being, I guess, an amateur writer to a professional writer, from someone who just did this as a hobby to someone who did this professionally. And when my first novel was published in 2017, writing that, book was a real challenge because you have to show up every single day. And, there's this whole idea about do what you're passionate about and you never have to work a day in your life. But I didn't really feel that. If you do what you're passionate about, you probably have to work harder than ever before. And for me, I really felt that with writing, but I felt like I was getting so much more out of it, that I was really able to connect with people and share and learn as well. So that's what kept me going, really.
I think this is really insightful for a lot of the undergraduates that we're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of our undergraduates can feel similar to you, where they're searching for something. They're not quite sure what they're looking for.
Yeah.
How did it feel going through those different jobs? Did you feel like you were on a path to something? Or do you feel like you were wandering?
At the time, I did not feel like I was on a path to something, I felt behind at the time, particularly as a lot of my friends were getting kind of the career jobs and they were going straight into their fields and they seemed quite settled and they knew what they were doing. And then there I was kind of changing jobs every 6 months or every year. And it felt like maybe like I was behind, or I wasn't taking life as seriously, or I'd missed the opportunities that I had had or hadn't made the most of them. But as time went on, I did start to feel more grounded in my belief that there's a reason why I've been taken in this direction. And then what I tried to do, because essentially all that, I guess the insecurity of feeling behind came from judgment of other people. So I'd often get asked, so you graduate university, like what are you doing now? And you try to explain what you're doing when you're not really sure, and that's really hard to do. So sometimes I wouldn't say, sometimes I wouldn't know what to say. change the conversation, etc. But I know that like that fleeting feeling that I felt was coming from other people's judgment. And so when I was able to put that aside, that's when I really began to feel as if this writing that I was doing was leading towards something. And looking back, I can really see that at each step of the way, it was pushing me in the right direction. I just had to keep moving forward. And so you might not know, if you knew what your path looked like, it would be too easy a path. It wouldn't be as meaningful, you know. So you have to go through these challenges to make sure that it's really the path that you're passionate about, because you can't do this. It's not going to come to you easy. Like whatever you're passionate about, whatever you want to do in the world, everything takes so much challenge and so many obstacles to overcome. And a part of it is a test for you to be sure that this is what you're really passionate about. And so having the privilege of being able to be invited to a conference such as this, some of my friends see what I'm doing now and it's like, actually I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday and it's like, oh bro, your life is so cool, like I wish I could do what you're doing. And I was like, well, 10 years ago, like when I was writing poems and there were some places that I went to, I got invited to, and there'll be like 2 people in the room and I'm doing poetry to 2 people, no one turned up. Like I used to put on events and like no one would turn up and stuff. Never even imagined being invited outside of the country, let alone having any platform anywhere that anyone would listen to. And then I had all these wild ideas about, oh, you know, I'm a refugee, and talking about refugee ideas or mental health or masculinity and these subjects that just people weren't speaking about. I feel like you are on a journey and you're discovering yourself along the way. Like none of it made sense, but now looking back, I can see how I arrived to be where I am.
And thank you for saying that, because I think that's the messaging that doesn't get to a lot of young people, I think. Mm-hmm. A lot of professionals in these careers say, oh, look at me now. And it was a foregone conclusion. Yeah. And everything happened as it was happening for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't talk about like, oh, it didn't quite make sense.
Yeah, for a long time.
You're a mental health social worker. Yeah. Can you talk about how you got into that?
Yeah, so I studied psychology initially, and the mental health social work particularly, I did that as a postgraduate degree. And I've always been passionate about psychology, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do necessarily. I didn't want to be a psychologist. I didn't want to do anything too clinical. I wanted to work with people. And so actually how it really came about was my friend has an office in London where there's a co-working space, and there was a social worker who we kind of bumped into, and they said they were working with a family, and we started having a conversation with them. And I was asking her some questions, and then she said to me, oh, you ask some really interesting questions, you know, I like the way you think, you should think about becoming a social worker. I thought to myself, a social worker, me? Because in the UK particularly, there's such negative perceptions about social workers, and largely because the stigma is that, oh, social workers, especially children and families, are there to like take away children, and that's what they would do. And I just thought, wait, what would it mean become a social worker? Like, it's never something I'd considered before. And they said, yeah, to look into it. You know, you seem like someone who's really passionate about people. You want to make positive impact in people's lives, etc., etc. So when I looked into it, I was like, oh, this sounds really good. I think I'd like to do this. And then eventually I found a program. I did the 2-year course. And then, so I've been a mental health social worker for about 5 years now, going into 6 years. I think similarly, it's just, you know, I can see now looking back how, this makes sense, you know, how I arrived to be here, but it wasn't a given. I had to almost like search for these opportunities and search for myself, search for things that make sense and that I feel passionate about and I'm able to pursue. And still to this day, I remember when I did the interview for the program, I remember leaving that program and thinking, I didn't pass the interview. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to reapply next year. I just have to figure out what I'm going to do for the next 12 months until next year. And somehow I got in because they could see my passion, you know, they can see what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Can you tell me what that job looks like?
It's in London. It's essentially a lot of community outreach work. Now, the way that it works in London, or the UK generally, so within mental health social work and particularly mental health, you either work from a clinical or health aspect or a social or therapeutic aspect. So that's more, my role is more specifically within the social aspect. And a lot of it is community outreach, it's legislative and statutory work, it's signposting and helping people make sure that they're aware of their rights and they can access certain services in the community. it's also one-to-one engagement and support. So a lot of people are isolated and, increasingly isolated, particularly in London. So we also find a way to engage people so that they can actually have kind of some connection within the community. Sometimes for some people, we're the only people that they see. And so it is varied, but it is very people oriented, and it's oriented around mental health, which are all the things that I'm passionate about. And I think it's one of the few jobs where I felt I've been able to bring my whole self into it, and that's the creative element, but also my passion about mental health, like everything that I believe in has been able to be brought together in this.
So the serendipity of this friend mentioning it.
Yeah.
And then bring it to your attention, and then you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Could I go back a little bit, just briefly through your childhood? Were you a good student growing up, like in elementary school, middle school? Like, how was that?
I would say I was a good student in primary school, maybe elementary. I think that's elementary.
Primary, yeah.
And then when I got to secondary school, I initially wasn't as good a student as I could have been because I was easily distracted. And the school that I went to probably didn't have, I guess, the highest expectations of their students because, you sometimes get put in a place and you're not really educated, you're not really schooled. You're just almost like you're babysat, if you will. You're in a room and the teacher doesn't really get to teach. But I think the more that I started, especially around the ages of 13, 14, the more that I started to find kind of my sense of self, that's when I became a better student. When I wanted to discover more about who I am and what I'm learning in relation to myself and in relation to the world, that's when I became a better student. For example, when reading Animal Farm by George Orwell, I was able to relate that to politics of colonialism and neocolonialism in Congo, like the politics of dictatorship and so forth. And it wasn't just a piece of literature that we was learning to pass the course, it was something that I could apply real world meaning to. And so when I was able to look at the education I was receiving in a real world context, that's when education really became powerful to me. And then the rest is just history. Like, I think education is transformative completely. And I think I've been able to value education both within the institution, but also outside of it, because I feel like you don't realize the opportunity that you're having, that so many people around the world would beg to have, would really give everything to have. And then so in using that, you also think, okay, if you want to empower people, how can you use this platform to empower people?
When you were growing up, what did you think you were going to do for work?
Well, when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a professional basketball player. And I think about that, and I don't think it was because I was particularly good at basketball or because I was particularly passionate about basketball, right? I think, especially for a young Black inner city boy, I think that's where, especially back then, it's different now because you have social media and so forth, so many different examples. But back then, representation is important. And so I think that was one of the few, if not only, spaces where I saw Black men who were shown like dignity and respect and seen as professionals, right? So I was like, okay, so this is the role that they're doing. I want to kind of be like that. I saw myself as that. I didn't see any poets. I didn't see any writers who are kind of from my background or, refugee, young and Black, etc. in the city. So I didn't know that that was even possible, So yeah, I thought about basketball a long time. And also there's the wealth element, isn't it? You come from an impoverished family. You want to transform your family's life. So you think about, okay, what's the thing that can make me the most money as soon as possible? But my passion for basketball didn't last, especially nowhere near as long as my passion for literature. But yeah, I think I just kind of, my sense of like what I would become really started to shift, and then the more that I saw like the creative part of me coming out, because that took a long time to accept as well, that I am an artist, I am a poet, because it's not something that, anyone ever called me a poet in school, or I never won poetry competitions, or in English class, the English teacher never really pointed me out to anything. So it felt like a strange shift into becoming who I would later become.
How about family pressures? How many siblings did you have, first of all?
So 4 siblings. Yeah, I'm the second youngest.
Was some of the pressure taken off, at least?
A little bit, but I think my parents had expectations of all of us. So I still felt the pressure regardless.
Did you know what the pressure was towards? Was it just excelling, or was it excelling towards something?
it was excelling, but also kind of excelling towards something, not necessarily something that they were saying you have to do this, but excelling towards something that was respectable and that made sense, you know. And back then, we didn't know any writers or poets. Like, where would you find a poet back then, you know? So yeah, it was just something that unraveled, like, yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I think that same dynamic repeats itself, I think even today in the UK or in the US, is that idea of representation. Who's being represented in what field?
Yeah, completely.
I guess my question now is, how do you balance these identities as a medical social worker and as a poet, or are those complementary identities, or how does that work together?
I think now I've reached the stage in my respective careers where they can work together. You know, I mean, it's really interesting because I used to hide my creative work from my professional work, but now I've really been able to merge them together. And so I'm able to bring my creative work into my professional role and my professional role into my creative role as well. So the only way that it may look a bit different is how I manage my time, because the creative stuff I do independently, whereas my mental health social work, I do that within an organization. But I'm really able to, like, I feel content because I'm really able to bring my full self. Like, I don't feel like I have to hide or do anything like that.
I think that's an incredible message. There's so many young people that are feeling pressure like you are to just get something respectable. Maybe they're thinking about healthcare, but they have a creative side to them. And then someone like you is able to balance these two that are actually complementary. So I think that's a huge message to anyone who's thinking about a career in health, who also has all of these creative ideas behind them.
You don't, you know, I wish someone had told me this sooner, but you don't have to be just one thing. You know, we get told that, okay, if you're this, you're that, you know, that's it. Like, choose the one path. At 18 years old, choose the one path that you're going to do for the rest of your life. Like, so for the next, like, 50 years, this is what you're going to do. And that's overwhelming. You know, you can't expect an 18-year-old to make that decision. But yeah, I wish someone had told me a long time ago that you can be more than one thing, because for me, when I discovered that, I was like, wow, you can. And I felt really comfortable. And even now, there's still, I guess, like an evolution of who I am and who I'm becoming and what I'm passionate about. So of all the things that I've done and I'm doing, there's still other things that I'm adding to that as well.
Which I think is a whole nother thing that is lost when we're talking to younger people, is the whole idea of an evolution of a career or an evolution of a person. We're like, oh, you become a doctor, you become a social worker, that's it. And what you're saying is that, oh, actually, that's just the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it is something that's within the same field, there's still so many different things that you can do, different ways of practicing. There's different ways in which you can be autonomous and independent as well, and network and meet people, and other people will give you ideas and give you kind of hope. And also, which I found, I guess, probably the most impactful for me on my journey, is sometimes people will believe in you more than you believe in yourself, you know, and believe that you can do something. And that gives you like a lot of courage to keep going along the way, even if things don't look like they're making sense, you know, especially from a writer or poetry perspective. This was a time where, like, you know, I wasn't making any money or anything like that. And, you know, nowadays there's a lot of pressure on young people to make money immediately, right? Like, the thing that you do has to make you money. But I always think it's like, for me, regardless of whether or not I'd made any money out of writing or poetry or any of the speaking or anything that I've done, I would still be writing. I would still be telling these stories. They would still exist. The difference is whether or not they would exist publicly and people would know about it. But these are stories that would have always been written. Like, I would have always been passionate about it. And so I think it's really important to remember to follow the passion rather than just like what can make you the most money immediately. Now, obviously, you know, realistically, we live in a world where you have to make money to survive, but we can't let that be the be all and the end all of our efforts. Like, our lives mean so much more than just money. And I know that, you know, from my previous experiences as well, you can have as, you know, well-paying job as possible, right? But if you are not fulfilled in that, it won't last. Like, I've seen it as happen to myself. I've seen it happen to tons and tons of people. So yeah, especially if like young people are listening and want a bit of advice, like, don't compare yourself. Don't worry about the friend that's already got the nice car or the good job or this or that, or have already moved out and live independently. Just take your own time, build your own path, follow your own journey, and you will eventually get there. And then you'll get to a point in your life where it makes sense. You know, everything that you sacrifice will make sense. So, yeah.
And then one other question that I had was just this idea of representation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the undergraduates I work with are from, maybe their parents were refugees, they were refugees or immigrants of some kind. And I was just wondering, having that refugee identity, how does that change the way you're interacting with maybe some of the people through your social work role or through your writing career?
Yeah, I guess for me, being a refugee makes it easier for me to interact with people and to engage with people, because I know that, especially within mental health, being a refugee, you know what it's like to be isolated, to be displaced, to be considered other. And so for a lot of people who are experiencing mental health difficulties, that's also how they feel. So I think it's allowed me to be able to work with people from a non-judgmental place of compassion as well. And honestly, people who I work with, they can tell the difference between someone who is being non-judgmental and showing empathy towards them versus someone who is just there for their career or is already thinking about the next patient or is already thinking about going home, you know. And I think in these roles particularly, you have to be fully committed, you know, because you're a person working with people, and people, we can read each other well. And so that difference, that nuance there, that makes all the difference in the world to someone. And so that's been something that's always been super important to me.
How can we learn more about your work and your books?
I have a website, jjbola.com. I'm on various forms of social media, JJ_Bola. And I guess I'm just around somewhere in it. So for anyone who's interested, they'll find me. I always say, when it comes to art and literature, the work finds you at the right time when you need to find it. So I'm sure whoever is interested in my work and so forth will find it when they need to. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Me too.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Provider Pulse. A heartfelt thank you to JJ Bola for his generosity in sharing his story. From his family's journey as refugees, to navigating the uncertainty of early career paths, to building a life that blends creativity, advocacy, and work as a mental health social worker. His reflections on representation, resilience, and embracing an evolving identity remind us that our paths are rarely linear. You can find more about his work and events at his website, jjbola.com. That's jjbola.com. This interview was done in Halifax, Nova Scotia, during the 2025 conference of the Society of Refugee Healthcare Providers. JJ Bola was one of the invited keynote speakers and graciously agreed to be interviewed for the Ethnomed podcast. Here's a preview of next week's episode featuring Chelsea Ung, an international student from Malaysia who completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Washington and is starting her first year of medical school at the University of Washington School of Medicine.
I remember the first time I really felt homesick was when I was sitting in the student cafe and I was eating this really greasy pepperoni pizza, and I was just like, this is so sad. I'm just so sad. I'm so sad to be here. I'm sad to be eating this thing that I don't even like, and it's so greasy and I can feel it coating my insides, and I just miss home. I miss home cooked food. I miss my parents. I remember that was the first time I really felt wow, why am I here? And do I even belong here? Am I gonna have to do this for the rest of my life? And I remember doing my first biology class in freshman year, designed to be a weed out, and I got a 67, and I'd never gotten so low on a test before. I remember sobbing over this. I'm I'm never gonna be a doctor. I remember sitting there crying. I'm not a crier too, so I was this is very out of character. But I felt very overwhelmed by all this expectation and pressure, and am I going to be able to do this?
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Word of mouth is essential for us to reach new listeners. Be sure to visit our website at ethnomed.org for additional resources. Also follow us on YouTube and Instagram at ethnomeduw and on LinkedIn. Do you have comments or suggestions? We would love to hear from you at ethnomeduw at uw.edu. Thank you.